You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Wood.
And I'm Jennifer Connor.
From Equestrian Businesswomen, and you're listening to Equestrian B2B, the podcast that brings together industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and equestrians for conversations about how they build and sustain a successful business.
On today's show, we speak to Laurie Birnbach about her corporate experience in branding, strategy, and business development.
Laurie grew up showing hunters and jumpers in the Midwest and has spent most of her life involved in horses in some way. She has been a competitor at all levels. She has been a barn owner, a horse show mom, and been in horse show management. In her work life, Laurie spent 23 years as a national account director with the Coca-Cola Company, where she ran a $50 million a year P&L and managed the account team for one of Coke's largest food service customers.
Following her retirement from corporate life, Laurie took on the Director of Business Development role for Foxlea Farm in Venice, Florida, a nationally recognized horse show facility that drives over $100 million of economic impact to the Sarasota County. She has since rejoined the corporate world as the Director of Marketing in the U.S. for Contura Vet. Laurie and her husband reside in Sarasota on their private farm alongside their 6 horses, give or take depending on the day, 2 sheep, 3 chickens, and 1 dog, while their daughter Carly pursues social media fame and fortune in Texas and works on her business degree.
Buy your ticket today for the 2023 Equestrian Businesswomen Networking Brunch in Wellington, Florida. The Equestrian Businesswomen Networking Brunch will be held on Sunday, March 26, 2023, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. in the Wellington Club at Wellington International, home of the Winter Equestrian Festival. Mingle, talk, and listen to an inspiring speaker with delicious brunch food and champagne. Mark your calendar and join us on March 26th. Buy your ticket today at www.eqbusinesswomen.com. Sponsor opportunities are also available.
Are you an industry professional who has thought about writing a book? Bookending your business enhances credibility and creates powerful marketing opportunities. In-Course Publishing can bring your expertise to the printed page. As a hybrid publishing company, we partner with our authors through editing, designing, printing, and distribution. Don't leave opportunity on the shelf. Bookend your business today and let us bring your book into the unique arena of the equestrian market. Visit our website, incoursepublishing.com, to download a free PDF to help get you started.
Hi, Laurie. We're happy to have you join us today to talk about your business experience and, share what you've done in the horse world and the corporate world. So we're looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk.
We're going to jump right in and get started with some questions for you. So can you talk to us a little bit about what a corporate strategy might look like?
So corporate strategy would focus on the overarching objective and how they plan to get to that objective as far as profits, what the mission of the company is, how they're planning to grow their business. And I would say importantly in this day and age, what the company stands for. Consumers nowadays expect the companies that they do business with to take a stand on things and stand for something, not just be a company that sells things.
Mm. Yeah, we've talked about that before, and it's come up a few times, in how you present yourself and really giving the company like a face and a personality and
a story
behind
Yep.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And not just, here's the products we sell. But I see that more and more. And I think, the horse world is going to have to move right along with that as well.
Yes. Yeah. The old strategy, I think, was stay as neutral as possible, stay out of things. And one of the things we learned at Coke is, especially with the new generation, with Gen Z especially, they want to do business with people that do take a stand and make a difference in the world. So that's important. Whether you're always going to alienate somebody, but you do need to take a stand on where you want to be in the world.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's kind of like targeting who your customers are and, hopefully growing it from there. But like Patagonia's a perfect example, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh,
Definitely.
they're a great example. Yep, they are. And you can't just talk the talk, you've got to walk the walk. And they absolutely have done that.
Yep.
I applaud them.
Yeah, we talked to a few people now that have worked, sustainability into their products, and it's not sustainability for sustainability's sake. It's really feeling like they want to do something to help the world, and they have an idea and a passion for something, but they have to find a way to make it so it's not hurting the earth and people on the earth, or animals and nature, and having it be something that they feel and they follow and they really care about, and not just doing it because it sounds good.
Yes. And I think that's actually an excellent point. I think when sustainability first became a hot word or hot topic, everybody came out and said, oh, we're doing this and we're green and we're whatever, but they weren't necessarily backing up what they were doing. And I will say one of the cool things that the Coca-Cola company did when they really got into making a robust sustainability strategy is they took it as they weren't just responsible for what they did, they were responsible from cradle to grave. So,
yes.
For example, everything from where the sugar or the corn or whatever the ingredients are grown, they need to be responsible for trying to improve the impact of our suppliers, all the way out to when you are finished with your Diet Coke and you throw your can somewhere, that they also take responsibility for that. So you're right. Not just looking at it as a more holistic perspective, but in addition, the definition of sustainability isn't just your impact on the environment, it's also your impact on your employees' lives and your consumers' lives. So how do you make sustainability from a work perspective? How do you have work-life balance or work-life blend, or however you're going to look at it?
Yeah.
It's become a broader subject.
Yep.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that from a lot of different people now that are conscious of that.
Yeah.
Does corporate strategy differ from a business strategy?
So the difference would be that a corporate strategy is more about focusing on the growth of the company, what your profit motive is going to be, or your mission motive. There's a lot of companies that are purpose driven now instead of profit driven. What the company stands for, what your overarching purpose of existing as a company. Business strategy is more about competing in the marketplace. So more about your specific products or your division or what services you offer. How would you go about competing in the marketplace with that product or service?
Okay.
That would be the difference.
Yeah. So even though we use the word corporate, we don't mean actually like a huge corporation. It really is a difference between two strategies. And the word itself could apply to any size company.
Yes. So for example, let's take a horse show facility. So their corporate strategy is going to be like, let's say it's a facility that maybe does horse shows, but from different disciplines, or they also do other things like World Equestrian Center has conventions there, or conferences, or Foxley Farm has 3 different disciplines of horse shows that they put on there. And then they also do some community events. So from a corporate perspective, what is your overall goal and objectives in managing that facility? But then the business strategy might be, how do you market your winter horse show circuit versus your open show circuit that's basically a schooling show for the grassroots? Or how do you market your dressage shows versus your quarter horse shows?
So, we've kind of defined that corporate strategy and business strategy, and that corporate strategy does not apply only to large companies, but how might a large corporation's strategy differ from that of a small business? Does it, or can it be applied across the board?
So I would say there's some things that can be applied across the board. And then obviously there's some things that would be a big difference between a large multinational corporation versus a small local business. So for example, a large corporation may have a broader, like, global strategy that covers either multiple countries, multiple business units, or even just multiple brands. Where a smaller company, for example, Contra Vet, has one product, and they focus on one product. So obviously their strategy is a little bit different. There's different uses for that product, but it is one product. So for example, with the Coca-Cola company, obviously Coke in and of itself is a brand, but then also has a large portfolio of brands underneath that. And or Johnson & Johnson. I know Johnson & Johnson markets the Johnson & Johnson brand as well as all of their portfolio of companies, because there is some comfort behind having like a Johnson & Johnson behind a product. There can be a benefit to that versus a small business where you may have just one product. Like, for example, Arthur Vet, we focus more on marketing the brand of that one product because since we don't have a portfolio, that's pretty much where we want to put, like, and we have more limited resources. So we want to put our money towards building that brand instead of necessarily building the corporate brand.
Right.
Yeah. So I would say a smaller business would be obviously more focused.
Yeah.
On a smaller area versus a large corporation, which has to have multiple layers of strategy.
Right. And are there principles from a large corporate strategy that can be applied to small businesses?
Absolutely. So I would say the number one thing is to not try to be all things to all people. Decide who you are, what your objectives are, and have that be your North Star.
Yeah.
We look at it as like casting a net versus having a magnet. So you want to create the magnet that you're going to draw business and people to you versus going out and casting a net and trying to just find whatever you can find out in the field or the water or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that is very applicable. And again, from a corporate perspective, you're obviously going to have, or from a large corporation, you're going to have different brands. They're going to have the different magnets.
Yeah.
But in a smaller business, for example, a stable, you could have a training barn that you have the A circuit show people versus your beginner lesson program. You're obviously going to have a slightly different marketing strategy to those two different groups. Again, you need to pick who you are, be confident in it, and create a magnet that will draw those people to you. You're always going to get a broader group than what your core target is, but that's okay when you're attracting that to you. That's not necessarily okay if you're going out and trying to grasp at every single piece of business that you can get. That will fragment your resources, I think, and your focus too much.
Right. I really like that advice because I think a lot of people aren't focused enough, when they're starting a business and they think everybody should want this and
right.
And maybe not. Like, who are you trying to reach and who is your customer? So getting that focus in is important.
And I think that's all part of like, okay, what you don't just make a product to make a product to sell a product, right? Like you have to have a reason and a why behind your product and getting started. And so you've got to do that consciously for the people that you're trying to solve a problem for or fix something, right? And so that focus on those people I think is important, and that helps you grow your story
right
with your customer, and then and then you are being false, you're being authentic to who your products are and who you are and what you stand for. I think that's
so important. One of the best examples of how to think of a brand or your brand that I ever saw was Tommy Bahama. So Tommy Bahama is a fake person that they created. And they have a thing that they have a corporate document that says, what would Tommy do? And they've described, so this is one way to look at your brand. If you had to pick one person that was representative of who buys your brand, pick that person, give them a name, and kind of flesh out what they look like. So for example, Tommy Bahama, he's got a small trust fund, not a huge one, but he's got a small one. He plays golf instead of polo, probably. He likes a casual tropical lifestyle. He drives a nice car, but not, again, like there's a whole description of who he is, what he likes, what he does with his daily life. And if you picture that, like if you were going to send one person to a convention that was going to represent your brand, who would that be? And if you kind of develop a little picture or bio of that person, and then everything you do with your marketing, with anything that represents your brand, you try to go back to that bio and say, would that fit with this person that's representative of our brand do? And yes, there's going to be other people. There's going to be, Tommy may have a small trust fund, but there's going to be a lot of people that don't have trust funds that go buy Tommy Bahama, or a lot of really rich people that buy Tommy Bahama. But you want to try and make everything that you do fit to who that representative. That's a simple and I think easy to understand way to kind of measure things against your brand.
Great example.
Yeah, that's really cool. So can you explain the difference between branding versus marketing?
So yes, so branding is where a product or service lives in somebody's head. So let me give you a couple of examples. So when you think of FedEx, for example, you think of, when I need to get something there positively, absolutely, like get it there and have the tracking, I think of FedEx. When you think of, let me think of a recent one, TikTok, you probably think of people dancing and sharing stories and things like that. So where does a brand is where something lives in your head that's instant. As soon as you hear that brand, you think of kind of where that occupies in your head. Marketing would be more about promoting that brand and its image, or influencing what people think of that brand, or doing things that further support that brand. Like Nike is considered one of the strongest brands out there. Everything that you do either supports the position that you want your brand to take, or it could take away. Also, understanding that branding, while you can influence where a brand lives in your consumer's head, you can't dictate that. So while you may want your brand to be an upscale, high-end brand that does something, your consumer may say, no, not really, like I'm putting it down here. So you only have the ability to try to influence where it lives, not dictate it. Marketing is all about, number one, how do you sell that brand? Like the marketing would be more of a business strategy to a certain extent. Where do you need to be present? What will be a call to action to get people to use your service or buy your product? Then there's the more background marketing, like how do you put out things that kind of support in the background, support where you want that brand to live in your head. And then if you need to change a brand or rebrand something, how do you, I don't know if you've seen the new Folgers commercials. So Folgers, if you haven't seen the new ones, they're actually headquartered in Louisiana, and they have totally embraced their background now, that they're not just the boring, like when you wake up to coffee in the morning. Now they actually have a commercial that goes from their old kind of staid ads to now the whole Mardi Gras theme, and how they're way more edgy. So they are trying to actually reposition in people's heads where Folgers lived, which was kind of a stale old brand. Like when you think Folgers, you think instant coffee, not Starbucks, right? So if you take a look at their ad, that's a very good example of how they're trying to shift the perception of the brand. That would be marketing, not branding necessarily.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Is one more important than the other?
I would say everything starts with the brand. Now, again, it depends on what your product is. There's commodity products, like if you're selling corn futures, the value of a brand is basically nothing. That is a commodity. That's the definition of a commodity. If you are a horse show facility, you're obviously selling a different experience. If you're a riding instructor or you own a stable, you're selling the experience. So at that point, branding is very important, but then how you market, obviously, I think they're both pretty intertwined, because you can have an amazing brand, but if nobody's buying it, you're not going to stay in business. You can have an amazing marketing strategy, but if you have a bad product, or the perception of forget if it's a good or bad product, if the perception of your product is bad, then you won't be able to sell it. So I think they're pretty intertwined. And I would say they're both, depending on the situation, would depend on if it's more important or less important from a branding perspective. But marketing is always going to be important.
Yeah. And you've talked a little bit about, a corporation that has multiple brands or products under their umbrella. How do you manage that? And, what is the strategy of keeping keeping it cohesive and being able to market more than one brand?
So that's a good question. And I spent 23 years with the Coca-Cola Company, and it shifted back and forth a lot. I will say where it landed before I retired is we did market our portfolio of brands. So we tried to have, even though the individual strategies were slightly different, we tried to have the core strategy that all of each of the different brands had maybe a slightly different version of that core strategy, so that we had some consistency. Let me give you an example. Actually, let me give you an example with with the charitable foundation at Coca-Cola. So the charitable foundation at the Coca-Cola Company was about a mile wide and an inch deep. Like, basically, if employees had something they wanted to support, or a local manager had something they wanted to support, they supported it. There was no strategy behind it. We didn't necessarily make a huge impact in any one area, which you can see Amazon is actually going through this right now. They just canceled their Smile program because they felt like they were spending $2.5 billion or whatever it was, but not making a very big impact. Right. So what I see Amazon doing, or what Coke had done, is we came up with strategic pillars. So basically we had, I think it was 3 pillars. It was women, water, and I can't remember what the other one was. Sorry. So everything that we supported across the entire company had to fit into one of those categories. So like if it was water or sustainability, then it would fit. But if it was just some random little charity that you were going to give $500 to, they really, and it may sound terrible, but they didn't, because it didn't fit into the strategy. And what we ended up, the ending result was we made a far bigger impact on everything, but it also gave our local people guidelines on how to say yes and no. And that's one of the other important things of having a strategy. You are going to have, again, let's say you have a horse show facility, or let's say you have a stable, or your business, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to advertise, sponsor, promote. So how do you pick and choose those? I know one of the Coke bottlers used to say to me, because people would be like, well, think of all the exposure you're getting. And he would say, we're so overexposed, we feel like we're walking around naked. And so like from a Coke perspective, exposure didn't matter. Like everybody, It's the number 1 brand in the world. However, from like, for example, Foxley Farm drives $100 million a year of economic impact to Sarasota County. $100 million. That's more than the Atlanta Braves spring training. That's more than the Baltimore Orioles spring training. And nobody knew who they were in the local community. And pardon my French, but when I came on board and was looking to apply for some grants, I told the owner of Foxley, I'm like, so the county commission should be kissing your ass, not the Atlanta Braves, not the Baltimore Orioles. Because, for example, I asked them, I'm like, so how many of that 80 million that you drive, can you say people came specifically just to come to a spring training game? Right. And he's like, well, we can't really say that because it could be the beach or whatever. I'm like, well, at a horse show, 100% come for the horse show. And they happen to go to dinner and things like that. So that's the importance of if you need the exposure, where are you going to most effectively get it? if you have a strategy, it makes it easier, like I said, to say no to the local magazine that, okay, it may not be your exact target market. It just gives you a rule of thumb instead of just being reactionary to things.
Yes. Yep.
I know at Contura, that's one of the challenges that we're having is, of course, now that the product is becoming more well-known in the scene, we get approached for a lot of opportunities. Well, we're a relatively small company. It's not even just the financial resources, it's the people. Like, if you don't have the people resources to go execute something well, then don't do it.
Yes.
It's like buying the race car, but not putting the gas in it. If you buy the race car or buy the ad in that magazine or buy the sponsorship, but you don't activate it, you don't give it any gas, it's going to be a waste of money. Mm-hmm. So you need to pick and choose. And having a very clear strategy makes a huge difference in allowing you to more intelligently and more effectively pick and choose where you spend your resources.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, if someone has a corporate brand and then product brands below, is a corporate brand more important than the individual product brand, or, does it just depend on your strategy of whether people recognize one over the other?
I would say it depends on the situation. Mm-hmm. So, and I can use, with Coca-Cola, in mm-hmm. some cases, it hurt the brand if people knew that it was owned by the Coca-Cola company. Mm-hmm. So, especially some of the smaller, more green brands, so to speak, like Honest Tea, that was something you didn't necessarily want to affiliate with the Coca-Cola company, which, again, good, bad, or indifferent, is seen as a soft drink company. Mm-hmm. So if you have a healthy beverage that is and you're trying to create like a niche, small kind of out there player, it's not good to be associated with the big corporation behind it. On the flip side, if you are a new drug, the fact that you are backed by Pfizer or Bayer or somebody like that probably helps the perception of your company or of your mm-hmm. product. So I would say that just depends.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see it both ways for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Because I was thinking about like a Nike, and they've got Air Jordans, but then they have their own, Nike shoes, and how like prominent Nike is, and keeping the Jordan part of it as in like they kind of make Jordans as important as just
right.
who Nike is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, yeah. And
yes, that's a brand that stands on its own. Or the hotel brands, Marriott
right.
owns the Ritz now, and JW Marriott, and people that go to the Ritz might not think it's a good thing that it's owned by Marriott. So, mm-hmm. or vice versa. So, I think it just depends.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's super interesting, because I think about companies that, they have one product, they have several products, one dominates it. And sometimes I feel like it swallows up the actual company brand.
Yes.
But that's not necessarily a bad thing, I guess.
Right. And then in the example of Contura and Arthurmid, we have one product. So again, if we have limited resources, whether it's people or money, we want to promote the Arthurmid brand. Right now, there's no point in us fragmenting that mm-hmm. because it is just one brand. So yep. there's not a need to promote the Contura or build the Contura brand.
Yeah. And I think it can confuse people mm-hmm. In knowing what it is and how they're connected, and I didn't want that brand, I want this brand, and you're like, oh well, it's the same company.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Or people don't understand the difference between the company name and the product name. So,
yes. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they're buying the product.
Right.
That's a really good point, actually, because I didn't think about that. That it's the product name versus the company name. Mm-hmm. Not just like the brand,
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. Talking about branding again, do you think that personal branding is important? Because I know now in the day of influencers and everything, do you think that people should have personal brands?
I absolutely think it's one of the most important things you can do. And I can give you my personal journey. So I'm a huge advocate of women, elevating women leaders, making strong women, raising strong girls. I do believe, I think historically, men get their identity more from what they do than women do. So that all being said, it was interesting because after spending 23 years at the Coca-Cola company, which even though some of the perceptions of the company, there's some people that don't have good perceptions of it. At the end of the day, if I said I worked for Coke, everybody knew who it was. And I had a pretty strong brand in the company and with my customer and with that industry that I had been in for 23 years. When I retired from Coca-Cola, and I worked out of my house, but my customer was somewhere else, my office was somewhere else. The industries that I was involved, or the industry organizations I was involved with, were all somewhere else across the country, in some cases in different countries. So when I retired from Coke and brought all my horses home to my little farm that my husband didn't know that I had not sold and just had on lease, I did have a little bit of an identity crisis, and I went to help Fox Lee. And it's like, okay, nobody knows me in the community. I mean, yes, I have some friends, but as far as a brand of what I do in the workplace, nobody knows me. And I was a little bit lost. And how is that going to translate? And I will say, I was pleasantly surprised that I stuck to making sure that I got involved in things that supported what I felt my personal brand was. I tried to do some more visible things in certain areas that my personal brand could come through. And at the end of the day, now I have pretty good connections in the community. A lot of people know me, like the county commission, the city commissioners. I've gotten involved through my work with Fox Lee, doing a lot of some public speaking. And I can say that it took a while, but that brand became enduring and carried through to my next career. That's why I would say personal branding is so incredibly important, though, is because that is the one thing that you can take with you no matter where you go. Now, I will give you an example of one of the challenges is when you have a product and you can hold up the product and talk to people about the benefits of the product, that's theoretically easier to brand than you as a human. So you need to look at yourself like a product. And one of the exercises that we did once in a leadership situation that I was in is we actually came up with brands for ourselves. We used like name brands for ourselves. And that was a quick way as an icebreaker in a meeting or something like that to give people an idea of who you were. Like, for example, one girl was FedEx. When you absolutely positively has to be done overnight, that's who you went to. Or we had one that we called her Apollo 13 because basically you could give her, if there was an emergency or crisis, you could give her a box of parts of things and she would figure out how to get you back from the moon. So that was a simple way, not only to convey, it was a fun exercise just for an icebreaker, but to convey to other people, instantly who you were. But more importantly, if you try to look at yourself, if you were a brand or product, what brand would you be? Because that helps you kind of identify in your mind where you want to live in the space in people's head, just like a product. And that gives you kind of like the Tommy Bahama example. If you say, I want to be Apollo 13, that I'm the person they come to when they have to figure out a way to get back to the moon and they have no idea or from the moon and they have no idea what they're doing. That is a very good exercise from a personal branding perspective to help you identify with something. And then as you go throughout your day or plan things that you want to be visible at or how you want to do business with people, you can kind of think of that brand. So it's almost the opposite. Instead of picking a person that would represent you, pick an iconic brand that would represent you. And I find that that's been one of the more successful ways to think of personal branding.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, because I think if you are relating yourself to a really well-known brand, then that brand's story and everything related to it gets transferred, and okay, FedEx is a well-known brand, or
You probably don't want to be Southwest right now.
right. Right. Exactly.
On
but
TikTok.
I think, everything comes along with it, right?
Right.
It's that feeling that you get when you look at a brand, and, that if you want to be known for something like that, then I think, and you can convey that, then those feelings, those good feelings come along with it.
Right. And then you can give a brand a personality. And that's how I know there's a thing on TikTok right now that says it does the airlines, which is why I thought of Southwest. So they have, if the airlines were a person, and they have like Delta walks in the suit and very, buttoned up and conservative. And then like Spirit comes in a Hawaiian shirt that doesn't match with this thing and runs in. So again, you can go back and forth. You can give a brand a personality. And you can take your personality and give it a brand. But that just kind of helps you solidify what that magnet is that you're trying to convey. Like, especially when you may only have seconds or minutes to give a first impression of somebody. So that just gives you kind of, again, a guiding North Star.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's an exercise that like anybody can do at any time, because I think so many people are thinking about their personal brand, but in particular, I have some friends that are riding instructors, and they're, trying to figure out how to make their personal brand. And I think that that's a good exercise that they could do to kind of figure out, what they align with. And,
Well, it's interesting. I was on a committee for the USCF, and it was they did a think tank where we were trying to come up with how do they segment the horse show levels, right? Because the challenge was everything had become a premier horse show. Well, everything's not really a premier horse show. So how do we convey what we're trying to do? And we used the hotel example. So within the portfolio of, say, Marriott, you have the small, more exclusive elite hotels like the Ritz and JW Marriott. There's far fewer than those, and their qualifications or the things that they do are a very different level than a regular Marriott, all the way down to whatever the budget brands are that Marriott has. And again, there's a place that's not good or bad. Yeah. There's a place for everybody. So from a riding instructor perspective, exactly. Yeah. Are you Heritage Farms, which is like the Ritz, or are you the person that starts all the grassroots kids and gives them their base so that they can go be famous with somebody else maybe? So you kind of need to figure out, again, where you live, where you want to live, and where you're good at. And even if you pick more than one thing, still don't try to be everything to everybody.
Yeah. And all of those, like you said, they all have a place and they're all worthy of being there. But, I think we've said this a few times in different ways, but you have to be realistic about who you are and what you offer, and, looking hard what you can provide. And, if you're a homebody who likes to stay home and teach lessons, like, don't market yourself as the trainer who's going to go travel 40 weeks of the year.
Right.
So it's, it takes some introspection to find out who you are and then put that out there.
Yeah. And it's hard. Sometimes it's hard, especially in the horse industry. I know I have my little private farm, and my friend teaches some lessons on some of my daughter's retired ponies and some of my old hunters. And at first, everybody that called that wanted to have a lesson, I said yes. And then we had a couple people that really had the resources, both talent, desire, and money to go do something bigger. And we're just not set up for that. And as sad on the one hand it was to move them on to somebody else, it was good for them. And ultimately it was good for us because we kind of have our little niche.
Right.
of where
And
we
I
live.
think you find that, those big barns that don't have a place for kids who just want to take a lesson a week can then refer back to you if you're referring,
Yep,
kids who need to move on to a bigger barn to them. So I think that's
exactly.
good advice for everyone to think about in, what market you serve. And if you don't serve a certain market, who can you align with to give each other business?
Yeah, because I think that's one thing that we don't do very well in the equine industry is
everyone's so territorial.
Yes, exactly. And I do think that, if you're honest with yourself and you figure out who you can align with, and, everybody ends up winning in the long run.
Grow the pie instead of take a bigger piece, instead of pick that. Okay, so that,
yes,
my experience in the horse show management side, to your point, that is how it has always been. And it was very frustrating to me coming from corporate, especially because what I did was very collaborative, very much win-win. Let's think outside of the box. Let's figure out how we can grow something for everybody. And that is not how the horse show management industry is either. Like it was very, I think it's gotten a little bit better, but it was very much, I've got mine and I don't want you to take any of it. Instead of let's all work together and grow the pie, because then we're all going to win and figure out where, again, just like our last example, figure out where we live, what space do we occupy? And yes, we're going to overlap to a certain extent, but there's a lot of unique strengths of everybody. And so there's plenty to go around if everybody would just work together.
Yeah. I actually have a friend who's going through that right now. She runs some horse shows up in my area, and they're never rated. They're all local. She doesn't even have jumpers at it because she doesn't believe in promoting bad riding. That's exactly what she said. So she doesn't do that. And she, it's small. And there is somebody else who has a very big, very famous barn in the area. And this woman did a horse show a couple of times last year down the road from them, and they were mad and called her up and like screaming. And she's like, they're not even the same people that are coming to the horse show. So, and even if there's a few, like, I'm not doing it the same weekend as you. I'm not trying to steal business from you. I'm just trying to expand my area because I've had some issues with the facilities that I'm running them at, getting dates or whatever. And she's like, I'm going to continue to do my horse shows.
Yeah.
Well, and if they work together, they could cross promote. I mean, there's a lot of things. Yeah. It's been interesting, again, especially coming from a background where everything was about collaborating. And yes, we had competitors. I mean, obviously, who Coke's competitor is. And, but there's just so many things you can do to make it, if it was a little bit more collaborative, which hopefully it's maybe moving that direction a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, that's some of the conversation that we like to have, right?
Yeah.
Is for better business practices and promoting that, and having somebody like you who can come and give a perspective like that it, in corporate world, there are collaborations. And listen, we've seen collaborations between Coke and its competitor before, right?
Yes. Actually, right now there's a big ad out, right? With everybody, with all of them.
Yeah. So there's space for everybody, really.
Yeah. Which is another reason why it's important to decide where you live, what space you occupy, what you're really good at, and be a magnet instead of casting a net. Because I also believe that if you operate that way, especially in like the riding industry, you're going to pull people towards you instead of having to cling on to keeping people. And people are going to naturally gravitate to where it fits what they want to do.
Right. And where they feel that where they feel welcome and included.
Yes.
When building a personal brand, is there anything women should consider that differs from men?
Absolutely. That's a long list. So I would say number one is don't be afraid to speak up. Women tend to be more circular. Women will go to the people that can get the work done, where men tend to be more hierarchical. So be very aware of that. But don't be afraid to speak up. I don't remember the exact percentages, but men will go apply for a position or take on a role or responsibility because they absolutely think that they're qualified for it. Where women yeah, if they have 50% of the skill sets, where women, unless they have 100%, they're afraid to go for something. So I also think that if you see something, say something. We are fortunate in our generation that we can speak up and people will believe us, whether that's, the Me Too thing, whether that is simply unconscious discrimination of men versus women, etc. That is one of my personal mottos, is living authentic. And I try to never let something go by without calling it out. One of the things on my journey to making that kind of my hot button and my passion, we had a consultant come in to a big industry organization that I was part of, and they studied the 10 most lauded corporations. So the 10 corporations in the world that had received the most awards or recognition for elevating women. And when they looked at the numbers, they really hadn't moved the number that much, considering they had spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to do that. So they really took a deep dive in what was holding it back. And one of the things that they said is, it's not the people that blatantly are misogynistic or chauvinistic or whatever. It's the subliminal. It's women. It's us. It's us that when somebody's up for promotion or somebody wants to take a writing position, that you think, well, they're in their 20s. What if they get pregnant, or they are pregnant? And so I don't think that she wants to take that on. So we say no for that person without even giving them the opportunity to take it on. And it's men and women. And so I have now become very aware of everything that reinforces the message. So a funny story, my daughter was 3 going to a Jewish preschool, and she came home one day and said she was coloring some coloring book. And I'm like, so what are you coloring? She goes, it's a story about Adam and Eve. And I'm like, so what does it say about Adam and Eve? And she says, well, Eve made God mad because she did something she wasn't supposed to do. And I said, sweetie, throughout the ages, women have been blamed by men for a lot of things that weren't really our fault. And that's, and it's funny, then she started coming home, and when it would say Mr. Clock, she would cross it out and put Ms. Clock. So just speak up when you see things. And again, especially in our industry, because it's interesting, the diversity and inclusion committee, I've got a friend on that. And I don't remember what the exact number is, but 80% of us that participate are white women, right? But when you look at who horse show management is, 90% of it is old white men.
Yeah.
So how do we get a seat at the table and a voice at the table? So again, if you see something, say something would be my biggest thing. And the other thing that they found is women are great mentors. We're great at mentoring other people. We are not great at advocating for them. So for example, if a man leaves a company and goes somewhere else, he takes all of his people with him, all of his important people. If a woman leaves and goes somewhere else, she doesn't take anybody with her, typically. So men will advocate for other people to get jobs, or mostly other men. Women, again, we do a lot of mentoring. We don't necessarily do a lot of advocating to make things happen. So take a more active role in helping elevate other women too. And I would say, like I said, take advantage of the fact that we live in a time and a place where we can speak out when we see something. And because if everybody just keeps their mouth shut, it's never going to change.
Right.
Especially with our girls and what our daughters and the young girls see.
Yeah. And so, looking at your corporate experience and your experience within the equestrian industry, what is the best business advice that you can give people in the equestrian community?
So I would say it's easy to get stuck in the weeds every day, because especially in this business, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Especially with horses, because they don't respect that you've got time blocked off to do something completely different. I'm learning that with them being at home. Or they have a seizure in the paddock right out in front of me when I'm on a conference call. So they're very rude. Yes. So I would say, make sure that, yes, you're going to spend a lot of your time in the weeds, but take time every day, if you can, to step back for a few minutes and look at the bigger picture and where you're trying to get to, and then kind of just reset what you're doing that day. Like, is this getting me closer to my goal? Yes, there's things that you're going to have to deal with every single day, but make sure that you take at least a few moments every day to step back from the weeds and look at, where your North Star is, and why you're doing this and where you're trying to get to. So you don't just get caught up in the busyness of it all.
Yeah. That's great advice. I think because horses can fill every minute of your day with all of the busy stuff.
Yes. Or even from a leisure perspective, I found keeping my horses at home, I was spending so much time doing all the other stuff, I wasn't getting to ride. And it's like, so if that's the point of why I brought them home, then I need to figure out how I do what the whole main reason was, not just get caught up in all the busyness of taking care of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that can apply to a lot of things, right? I mean, any job. And even for me, I've used this example before. My dog had ACL surgery last year, and every day, like the first couple of days, I was like in tears, like, oh my God, this is such a long road. And, and then as you see a little progress, you're like, oh, wait, okay, we're getting there. Right. So you feel overwhelmed at first, but if you can take a minute to be like, okay, but we're still heading in the right direction, then maybe you can find some calm and then, move forward.
Yes. And take a breath.
Yeah.
Look at where you're going. Mm-hmm.
Well, we've learned a lot, I think. Yeah. And, there's a lot that we could go on asking, but we're going to move on to the questions that we ask every guest on an episode. So the first one goes to Connor.
What is one action that women can take to make a big difference in their lives?
Speak up. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what is the best habit that keeps you motivated personally?
I try to accomplish at least one thing every day that moves me closer to what my bigger purpose or goal is. Even if the rest of the day may be caught up in everything else. As long as I get one thing done, I give myself credit. I don't beat myself up for not getting my whole list of 72 different things done.
Yeah. That, I think that goes back to what you were saying before, of not getting lost in the weeds and still looking for something to make sure that you're going towards that goal. But I like that one because I do the same thing, and not beating yourself up, but especially, if you don't get 10 things done and you only get one thing done, like celebrate the one thing that you accomplished.
Right. Or if you actually got on your horse that day, even if it was for 10 minutes and you walked around twice, at least you got on your horse.
Right.
I did that yesterday. I've had a crazy week. I'm getting ready to go out of town. I just been like, I overbook myself all the time. Yesterday I didn't get on him, but I took him in the arena and I pulled some junk off of the side and made him walk on over poles. And he's a 3-year-old thoroughbred off the track. And so I'm really taking my time, but I put like a tiny little cross rail up and he just walked over it. And I was like, okay, good. We're done.
Yay.
I did something with my horse before I'm leaving.
Yeah.
Yes. 80% of something is better than 100% of nothing. So.
Oh, I like that.
Yep. Me too.
What's your favorite horse movie?
Desert Flight. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's a documentary, and I would strongly suggest everybody that is in the horse world go watch it. So it's called Desert Flight. It was a documentary, and I can't remember the girl's name. She put it together. She had the idea as she was in the ambulance going to the hospital after having a crash at a horse show, because she was trying to think, how does she explain to her friends and family what the essence and what the passion and what the addiction to horses, like, why do we do this every day? And it will give you goosebumps. And it's about 30 to 45 minutes long, I think. And it is basically a love letter to horse sports and what the key passion is. And it's great. I would highly recommend it.
Oh, cool. Right. I thought I saw every horse movie out there, but I have not seen this one. So I will go.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. Yep. And you can go watch it online. Yep.
And lastly, who would you recommend to be a future guest on this podcast?
So I have two people. The first one is Amy Derricott. She is actually the veterinary channel director for Contura Vet with me. She has been in the horse or the animal pharma world for a while. She also rides and competes. I would strongly recommend her. She's got some interesting background. And then also my friend and neighbor, Krissa Gillette, who lives here in my neighborhood. She was just recently named president of Terra Nova Equestrian Center, which is a new horse show facility here in my area. And she has a similar background to me. She came, although like on steroids. So she came from an even bigger, higher corporate job than me and decided to step out of that to pursue her horse dreams. And now is involved in another horse show facility and also has horses at home. And she would be a great person to have on.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about your experience and sharing what you've learned. I think we've picked up a lot of really incredible advice, and we love being able to share that with everyone. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I love that I have the opportunity and the privilege of taking what I learned in corporate and applying it to the horse world. That's the best of both worlds, being able to take those skill sets and use it where you're really truly passionate.
Yeah.
Not that I wasn't passionate about my Diet Coke, but way more passionate about my horses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
Laurie had so much good advice for people. And I loved that she was able to give so many relatable examples of how, of brands or strategy and how different companies have done it, because, you can talk a lot and use like a lot of words to explain, but sometimes people just need like concrete examples of things that they know and they recognize in order to understand a concept. So I thought she really did an amazing job at that.
Yeah, she certainly did an amazing job. And I think my favorite was talking about Tommy Bahama and like the behind the scenes about, like he's this fictional person. Like that's such a cool idea. That you can do for yourself or, anything. And I love the little leadership tips she gave us on exercises that she's done at these programs that everybody should do. Sit down and do. And the corporate branding, I was like, oh man, I'm trying to listen to her, but I was also trying to think of who am I as a brand? So I was like, I got to go back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be one to revisit. That's for sure. Cause I think, I don't know. I just find, people like her and so many of the guests we have that can like speak off the cuff so well about, obviously she has like decades of experience doing this, so she can talk about it, but I just was so impressed at, how easily she can explain things.
Yeah. Yeah. Broke it down to make it relatable for everyone.
Yeah.
So that was a good chat. And I'll probably be listening to this one several times because I think it's important, for people to practice some of the things that she had in there. So I definitely am going to do that.
For sure.
Yeah. So we got to get going on to our next adventures, and you can find the links to today's guests and the show notes at www.eqbusinesswomen.com. Equestrian B2B is out twice a month on the 1st and the 15th.
You can find out more at eqbusinesswomen.com and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Find Equestrian B2B wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. We want to know your feedback, so go ahead and tell us. You can have all 20 plus shows of the Horse Radio Network with you wherever you go with their free app for iPhone and Android. Go to your app store and search Horse Radio Network.
Now go build a strategy.